This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? This is such good shit. Thanks, guys. Back to you.
I don't even know what day it is. When did I record this? It's going up Friday, but I don't even remember. Half the audio you're about to hear was spliced up into about 4 different days. It's just one of those weeks, people. I said my schedule's getting a little more hectic, and boy, did I underestimate that shite. It's great, though. Love it. Can't complain. I mean, I could, but I won't. Yeah, this is the Friday podcast that was recorded, I think, on Tuesday night, parts of Thursday night, well, obviously being uploaded Friday. I don't know if that's going to be a regular thing going forward. I'm also trying to avoid having to upload the Friday show in the late afternoon. So we'll see. But you know what time it is. Here on the FSWR channel, we're back for another Friday installment here for our classic review series. As always, make sure you subscribe, comment, like the show for me. We are on YouTube and Rumble every Monday and Friday for both our weekly podcasts. I may or may not end up repeating all the same verbiage by the end of the show, because, quite frankly, I've already forgotten whether or not I previously addressed it. But we're going to roll with it. Just like Monday Night Raw, which will be rolling right off a cliff this coming fall when they don't re-sign with the USA Network. I've only seen the headlines. I haven't read the actual reports on what's going on with all that. But it is probably the biggest news bulletin to hit the wrestling media this week. I'm sure we'll hear all about it. But we're going to stick with the classics here and begin our Friday show with this NWA Crockett TV review. And this was the week. They promised we hear about the status of the 1988 Crockett Cup here. More specifically, the location and venue of where the event would be held. And in addition to that, we were also going to see a live blow-off to a grudge feud on this program, featuring the Lightning Express and the Sheep Herders. A grudge feud that apparently only existed in the minds of the individuals involved. We were told here from Jim Ross that they have been traveling the globe having multiple matches with each other. The score is yet to be settled. So as a means to promote said blow-off for this week's Superstation, the Sheepherders came out to, as I wrote down, scream a bunch of incoherent psychobabble. I believe they promised to beat up the Lightning Express and prepared to do battle in the Crockett Cup tournament. I mean, I was mostly distracted watching Johnny Ace in the background be completely feckless while he's waving that New Zealand flag around. That guy had a hell of a gig early on in his career before they actually tried to make him something in the Dynamic Dudes tag team. What a complete waste of time and energy that guy was. So we had that to look forward to this week. The Lightning Express versus the Sheepherders. Get your popcorn ready, folks. That one's a can't miss. So we eventually went to the ring for Sting versus John Savage. During this minute-long squash, they did about 50 rapid-fire camera pans to show the crowd reactions. The looks I saw on people's faces read everything from great enthusiasm to total confusion. There was a little girl covering her ears at one point, glaring at her mom with a look of horror. She was, Something tells me she wasn't a Stinger fan. And then after Sting won with the Scorpion, he did a quick promo at ringside with David Crockett, basically explaining in no uncertain terms that he had the Nature Boy beat. Had it not been for those group of thugs in Tully and Arn, Sting should be standing here as the World Heavyweight Champion right about now. Unfortunately, things didn't go according to plan, but he promises that Flair's day will come, sooner rather than later. By the way, I want to point out for the record here, Sting was completely blown up. The match he just worked, it went a sum total of about 60 seconds and change. It is amazing to think Ric Flair got 45 minutes out of this fucking guy. Unreal. Then we came back for Shane Douglas and Ricky Santana versus the Lima Bean Connection in their neon bright green bodysuits. They were just glaring enough to make a blind man wince. I mean, beyond the story of the laughably hideous bodysuits, the big takeaway from the story here was following up from last week where Ricky Santana extended the olive branch to Douglas, wanting to be his tag team partner. For what purpose, I still have no idea. I believe the rationale was, we need bodies to fill up the brackets in the 88 Crockett Cup, so let's try every feasible makeshift pairing we can possibly come up with. Just grab some random names out of a hat and see what fits. Ricky Santana and Shane Douglas. Why the fuck not? These guys have nothing in common. They'll be perfect as a tag team. And they had about as much chemistry together as mixing oil and water. They did several double team moves on the job, guys. Pretty much worked polar opposite styles. Eventually, Douglas was able to hit one of the green guys with a belly-to-belly suplex for the pin. They again brought up the story of Shane Douglas being a Magnum TA protege. So the belly-to-belly was an obvious homage. But that's pretty much it for that one. Shane Douglas and Ricky Santana are now tag team partners. Just because. But that took us to the other big talking point on this week's show. In addition to the Crockett Cup announcement, we had some development in the Road Warrior Animal eye injury. Remember, he was sidelined with said injury during the bench press contest with the Powers of Pain back in Greensboro. We have not heard from him since. So this was the week we got the status update on his health. And it was a very subdued, calm animal. The JR even warned us that it was an unconventional promo here, something we were not used to seeing. He wasn't hollering. He wasn't screaming. In fact, it was per doctor's orders. He was not allowed to get rambunctious for this interview, just because they didn't want to take the risk with his health. But he kind of walked everybody through the gruesome detail of, what the surgeons had to do to fix his eyeball. Said he damn near lost his vision. It was so bad. He said for the first time in his life, he had no clue how to process any of it. But there's one thing he does know. He knows that the Powers of Pain, Ivan Koloff, and Paul Jones are going to pay for everything they did. Very short and sweet. But at the same time, it was cool seeing this version of Animal in contrast to what we were used to seeing from him on TV. For good or bad, it was a rare moment where we, the audience, saw Animal in a vulnerable state. Very much out of kayfabe. We finally understood what it was like to feel the brunt of physical pain, as opposed to the other way around. Really good stuff. Now, of course, we didn't see the Animal's eye here, because he was wearing shades. But it makes you wonder, how bad was that eye injury? Well, guess we'll have to wait and see what happens when he finally removes the shades. So from there, we venture back to the ring for the featured TV bout. They wasted no time getting to this one. The Lightning Express versus the Sheep Herders. A feud that was apparently all centered around bragging rights. What we were led to believe, I guess. I think we've seen one TV angle they shot with these guys on the Superstation where the Sheep Herders tried to go after Tim Horner with a pair of shears. Beyond that, I think they passingly mentioned these guys together in promos. So, call me skeptical to say this was a grudge feud. And, well, up until about the last 90 seconds, it was all relatively basic stuff. Kind of followed the regular pattern of a lot of old school tag matches. Early babyface flurry. Heels isolate one of the babyfaces for a while. You eventually build to the hot tag sequence. I mean, it's all cut and dry action. Nothing we've never seen a million times before. I mean, the one thing I can never take away from Brad Armstrong, that guy was a hell of a seller. When it came time for him to be the babyface in peril, he didn't half-ass it. I mean, with Luke and Butch, what you see is what you get a lot of the time. Their movements are always very clunky and not all that fluid. So the heat portion really just kind of started to drag after a little while. But they do end up building to the fun little chaotic sequence where Horner and Butch accidentally bonk heads. So Horner ends up falling on top of Butch for the visual pin. But while that's going on, Armstrong and Luke are fighting on the floor. And Teddy's distracted dealing with Johnny Ace on the other side. And they do the spot where the heel comes in and tries to roll out his tag partner to cover the babyface when he's in trouble. But before Teddy can count the 3, Armstrong thwarts it and points to the fact that the Sheep Herders had an illegal pin going. And they end up doing the spot where Horner's about to win the match with a bridging roll-up. But Johnny sneaks in and drives the flag over Horner's throat for the DQ. We were also told that he bent the post during the attack. I'm about 90% sure the pole was already bent before the attack. But, yeah, that is how they went to break. So, indeed, this grudge match that we were all apparently anticipating a blow-off for, DQ finish. Go figure. And, again, prior to the brawl sequence at the end, I mean, there really wasn't anything during the match that made you think, oh man, this is really exciting action. I hope we get another match with these guys down the pike. It was just like, okay, yeah, this is fine. Nothing that's really lighting my world on fire. I don't really view either of these teams as Midnight Express Legion of Doom level tag teams. But it kind of goes back to the conversation we've been having about the state of the tag division at this point in 88. They literally just aired a video package for the upcoming debut of the Fantastics. Probably wasn't a moment too soon. I mean, they needed the Fantastics like a drunk man needs an Alka-Seltzer. I mean, all in all, the match wasn't bad. Just, again, nothing that made you think, I need to see this match again. which probably wasn't their intention, especially with the Crockett Cup coming up so soon. Speaking of all this Crockett Cup talk, it is now time to reveal the location, or should I say locations, for the third annual Crockett Cup tournament. What they were billing here as a dual-hosted event. This year, they were making this a two-night extravaganza where the semifinals would be held on April 22nd in Greenville, South Carolina. And then the following night, the finals would be taking place in the Greensboro Coliseum in North Carolina. So they held the press conference where the building managers and the facilitators got to talk about the event, acknowledging the honor to be able to host the 88 Crockett Cup at their designated venues. Two of the important hotbeds for Crockett's regional promotion. It was pretty simple stuff. Looked professional. Now, they didn't announce any brackets or anything here. This was just kind of mainly to facilitate where the event would be held. And I guess it is important to note for historical purposes, this would be the final year where they held the Jim Crockett Sr. Memorial Cup until 2019, when they relaunched the NWA on a smaller scale, more or less. But it kind of makes sense, considering the Turner sale later on in the year. After this April, they really didn't have much of a reason to host the Crockett Cup tournament. Not unless they were willing to use Crockett's name under the banner, which they were going to never do for legal reasons. So yeah, after this year, the annual Crockett Cup tournament was pretty much a dead concept. It's kind of a shame to think about, too, when you consider the effective business it did for the promotion in 86 and 87. But then again, look at those attendance figures for when they ran New Orleans in 86, and then in Baltimore the following year. I think they were doing somewhere around 12 to 13,000 fans for both those events. Guess what their attendance figure was for Greenville and Greensboro in 88? 4,400 in Greenville, 6,300 in Greensboro. They basically slashed the audience in half. And then some. It's a really sad state of affairs. But that's how bad business was sagging in 1988. The house shows, the live events, everything was floundering. Gate numbers were falling by the month. Pretty steadily up until the summertime during the Bash Tour when business got hot for a couple months. But this early to mid-88 period was just really bad for the company. People are not dishing out money to buy tickets. And of course, when you look at the booking for the weekly shows, it's not hard to imagine why. Outside Sting and Flair, there's not a whole lot of meat or substance happening right now. A couple things being workshopped in the lead up to the Crockett Cup, but it's not tearing the house down. So as we get ready to pitch back to the ring for this Midnight's match, I had to point out some more classic Tony Schiavone facials. As JC's talking about dream matches and all the options that could come out of the Crockett Cup finals, he has a dream match that people would pay to see. David Crockett versus the English language. To which Tony does the unenthused glare to the camera like, this fucking jabroni right here. So we had the Midnights versus Kurt Thompson and Cody Starr. I apparently have a lot of blood relatives that wrestled as job guys back on the Superstation show in the 80s. We got Cody Starr. We got Mark Starr. I think there was another Starr that was lurking about once upon a time on these shows. During Corny's routine verbal escapade, he was bringing up all the cities the Midnights traveled to in the last week. At one point, He had mentioned something about a Sewerville town where the Midnights made a pit stop to join a club watching paint dry. I thought to myself, well, you know, if you are going to venture to a town like Sewerville, I can only imagine what joyous activities await on the other side. So the Midnights are in there dominating like normal. I think the other big comment from Corny here was the moment at the end where he mentioned the Fantastics by name, saying he knows all about them. He's been less than impressed. Just planting the seed for that eventual showdown. Midnights ultimately went over with a rocket launcher. And then we came back from break where David Crockett informed everybody to tune into the syndicated Sunday program where we can catch the scoop on the upcoming Clash of Champions for March 27th. Some more big events to promote in the upcoming weeks. And that brought out Jim Cornette and the Midnights to do a little housekeeping on where they currently stand in the tag team rankings. You know, because they actually had those back in the day. Beyond the fact that there's no suitable competition, outside teams like Tully and Arn and the Powers of Pain, of course, it is obvious who the number one ranked seed ought to be for this year's Crockett Cup. And since Jim Crockett likes conspiring against the Midnights, he'd probably do everything in his power to make sure the Midnights are not ranked at the top of the leaderboard. But this is the year, beyond a shadow of a doubt, if Bobby and Stan are not ranked the number one seed, something's rotten in Denmark. This is the year for the Midnights to earn that number one slot, regardless of who the biased fans vote for. There's pretty formulaic stuff here. I did know Bobby and Stan fucking around with David's pen toward the end of this promo. Can't really tell what the purpose of it was, other than the two trying to amuse themselves. And we all know the Midnights are good at the subtle things. This one, I'm not entirely sure what they were thinking. Pretty sure they were just trying to draw attention to themselves. And that led us to Barry Windham and Lex Luger versus Gene Ligon and Rick Orasi. My notes were very succinct. Barry did about 1,000 moves in a row. Luger did like one overhead press slam into a body slam. Barry did about another 40 moves in a row and then finally finished Rick off with a running lariat. Just kind of another example where we're just sitting here buying our time, waiting for the inevitable to happen. I mean, we all know it's coming up with Windham and Luger pretty soon. Just about everything we see with these guys at this point is just kind of void filler. But you know what's funny? We know where it's all going, yet at the same time, they really haven't done a whole lot to really establish any kind of tease of Barry going heel. Like, think about it for a minute. Everything we've seen with him and Luger on TV, they work perfectly well together. There's never any miscommunication. Never anything to directly indicate that they have tension with each other. Yeah, it's really interesting how quickly a lot of that all came together. You know, and the fans were very pro-Windham at this point, too. It's not like they were swimming upstream trying to fight the crowd. I mean, with where we are in the timeline, the idea seems to be we want the people to believe that Barry and Lex might be one of the finalists in the Crockett Cup. Very interesting to see how they're developing this on TV. So here's something funny. Get this next match. Ron and Jimmy Garvin versus Dave Isley and Paul Lee. Not Paul E. But Paul Lee, what a missed opportunity. Could have registered the gimmick as a trademark. Call himself Paul Lee Dangerously. Missed the boat. I mean, the guy looked like shit physically. He had that Lawler knockoff singlet. His fucking titties bouncing all over the place. It was vile. Thank God Ronnie killed him. Ended up going over with the Garvin Stomp. It was also during this match where I had to yet again remind myself, Ron Garvin is still just an ordinary dude on the show. He is now gone in the span of 3 months from main eventing Starrcade 87 with Ric Flair to now working tag matches with his kayfabe brother Jimmy. Not even being the central focus of all the stuff that's ongoing with Jimmy Garvin, Precious, and the Varsity Club. Like, Ronnie's just on the outskirts looking in. He still does all the regular Ron Garvin offense, just with about 50% less crowd reception. It's insane to see how quickly this guy's fallen off the radar. I mean, it's now even gone to the point where Ric Flair won't even acknowledge him. Hey, speak of the Handsome Devil. He and JJ were at ringside to do some live event plugs for tomorrow's event in the Omni. It is the 6-man cage match showdown with Flair, Tully, and Arn versus Luger, Dusty, and Ole. And yet again, JJ's here to stir the pot and try to get everybody to remember the previous history where Dusty and Ole were on opposing sides. Trying to get him to remember when Ole attacked him in the parking lot and bludgeoned his hand. Or the time Luger jumped Dusty with the rest of the Horsemen and left him a mangled mess. Just twist that knife as much as you can, JJ. We wouldn't want to let that history go unnoticed. Meanwhile, Ric Flair begins his promo by completely ignoring everything JJ just said, so he could point to a fat woman in the crowd, telling her that if she behaves herself, maybe Dusty will give her a good time. And then he proceeded to talk about the segment from last week where he almost got kicked off the air for punching himself in the face and bleeding in front of a nationwide TV audience. He basically said, I'm under the gun right now, so I need to calm down and not push the envelope. Elsewise, the network might fire me. And you might remember me saying at the time, how in the fuck did Ric Flair get away with punching himself in the forehead and not risk termination? Well, the answer is, they threatened to, apparently. But you know, since it's Ric Flair, they eventually gave him a slap on the wrist and told him to watch himself. So Flair did a relatively calm, per Ric Flair standards, promo. You know, essentially letting Luger know that tomorrow in the Omni, Flair's going to teach him a life lesson he'll soon never forget. First time they find themselves standing across the ring from each other. So it's going to be a big moment. And he talked about Dusty and Ole too. And then he did a promo on Sting, promising that whatever town they find themselves standing across the ring from each other in, Flair will make sure Sting regrets the day he tried to embarrass him on TV. And it was, by all accounts, a moderately tame Ric Flair promo. I just can't imagine what that conversation must have been like with the TV executives. Like them raking Flair over the coals for essentially giving himself a concussion on TBS. Again, it's important to remember this, people. Crockett is about to sell this company to the Turner Network in 8 months. Just keep that in the back of your head as we're seeing all this train wreck TV unfold. As we all wonder to ourselves, what went wrong? You can all trace it back to here. So then we have the Garvins out for a promo, where David Crockett began his line of questioning with the following statement, looking into Ronnie's eyes and creepily going, "I like the way you wrestle." Quite disturbing. So, Ron talked about this, that, and the other thing. Basically promised that when Flair is done feuding with the 16 other guys he's currently entangled with, Ron Garvin will be the 17th guy in line to step up and challenge Flair for the world's title. He also put over Jimmy Garvin's aspirations to be a singles champion, saying he wants to go after the TV title. And when all is said and done, the Garvins will team up together to challenge the Midnights for the U.S. tag straps. To which Jimmy chimed in and said that he's real happy right now because he sees good things in the future for the Garvin brothers. And after Jimmy beats Mike Rotunda for the TV belt, he's going to put an end to all this Kevin Sullivan nonsense. He's not a fan of the way Sullivan thinks or acts. He says his idle threats mean nothing, and he's going to make sure he never gets the chance to lay a hand on Precious. I mean, it was pretty standard stuff. I did laugh when Ronnie mentioned he was going to be a world's heavyweight champion again. But, the promo wasn't bad. Fired up Ronnie Garvin is always 10 times better than milquetoast Ronnie Garvin. It's just the problem, at this stage, it's so hard to ever take him seriously as a credible singles guy again. I know he's not around for much longer, but still, at this stage in his career, you could see them already kind of phasing him out of the picture entirely. So that took us to the 6-man tag with the Powers of Pain and Ivan Koloff versus Mike Jackson, Alan Martin, and Joe Cruz. Last week, I believe there was a 6-man where the POP and Koloff obliterated 3 job guys in pretty convincing fashion. This week, they pretty much dealt the same exact ass beating. Of course, they had to throw Mike Jackson in there to do the bulk of the work for the job team. What horrible treatment for our former Alabama junior heavyweight champion. But it's lather, rinse, repeat formula with most of the Powers of Pain Koloff squashes. A lot of power moves, a lot of tossing dudes around like rag dolls. Paul Jones is out there being Paul Jones. Mostly being there to collect a paycheck. And occasionally run interference. Barbarian and Warlord ended up beating Martin with a diving headbutt backbreaker combo. Just folded that guy up like an accordion on the back of his neck. God, I thought he was dead. And that set up the Paul Jones Army promo, where Jones informed us that Road Warrior Animal was, quote, like a cow that got castrated. I think his message was supposed to be that Animal was made to look vulnerable and helpless, as was Hawk and Paul Ellering. Jones showed a still image of the bench press contest where the Powers of Pain laid waste to the Legion of Doom. He said that he promised in 1987 that the Road Warriors would be humiliated. Promised that they would soon not be viewed as the world's strongest team. And the next time they meet eye to eye, face to face, The end result will be no different than that famous night in Greensboro. The Powers of Pain will leave as the six-man champions alongside Ivan, and the Road Warriors will be beaten, battered, and humiliated once again. And according to Paul Jones, will also be castrated cows. It is a joy having this man as part of the show. Simply for moments like that. And then David Crockett immediately tried to undercut him by saying, well, let's go back to the ring to see a real tough guy. Could you try any harder to cut the heel's balls out from under them, David? I think he did the same thing to the Midnights earlier on. Right before that Barry Windham-Lex Luger match. He was like, let's go see a real tough tag team. Not these phony baloney fake tough guys in the Midnight Express. They ain't so tough. So indeed, we had very tough Ron Simmons versus Ryan Wagner. It was all action for about 60 seconds. Ron just kind of steamrolled over Wagner and killed him with several football tackles. He eventually won with a spine buster. Basically treated it like a day at the training facility, beating up those padded blocking squares. Only difference was Wagner wasn't padded or made of rubber, so he pretty much got killed. It was fun. Very enjoyable. We all love seeing the job guys get massacred. And then we go to the booth for Dusty Rhodes, so he could profess his innocence when it comes to having any inappropriate sexual relations with Baby Doll. Even goes as far as to say, if you have photos or evidence or clues to show Dusty ever doing anything ungodly to Baby Doll, he encourages all those people to step forward and prove it. And then Dusty cranks this bitch up to about 11 with this fucking dynamite promo he delivered. He drags David over to ringside so he can comment on Ric Flair's promo from earlier when he stood out here and caught out the NWA fans, making fun of the way they look or the way they dress. Dusty says, I ain't a normal looking athlete myself, but I'm a 3 times world heavyweight champion, daddy. And that's a fact, Jack. I'm the bull of the woods, the tower of power, too sweet to be sour. I know I just fucking butchered that whole thing. But as far as it goes with the fat shaming, he says, my sister is 6'2", 280 pounds. Saying she could wipe the floor with Ric Flair and look back and say, I wish it wasn't so easy. So as far as things go tomorrow in the Omni, there's only one thing left to do, and that's to get funky like a monkey, if you will. And David Crockett perfectly caps it off by looking at the camera and saying, there's no more to say. Back at you in just a minute. Now, again, I know I just destroyed that promo. Let it be known, that may in fact have been the promo of the year. Dusty Rhodes, still hitting on all the cylinders. Now I know where Cody gets it from. It's the cadence. It's the delivery. God, these are the promos you look back on and think, damn, I wish we got more stuff like this. This is so great. He had the people in the palm of his hand right here, as only Dusty could do. So then we came back for Mike Rotunda and Rick Steiner versus Trent Knight and Gary Phelps. During the early stages, JR had mentioned that he tried to catch up with Kevin Sullivan for comment throughout the day. He said it was like speaking to a guy that was there, but not all there, if you know what that means. No. No, as a matter of fact, JR, I do not know what that means. If you are there, how can you at the same time not be there? No comprendo. So the match was the usual varsity club squash. A lot of amateur stuff from Rotunda and Steiner. Finish was all kinds of fucked up, where Steiner went to pull Phelps into a sugar hold, but wound up accidentally pinning his shoulders to the mat as a shoot. So, of course, Steiner naturally kept beating the shit out of him after the bell. And the Rotunda had to get in there and pry him off of him. And that led to this equally great interview segment where Kevin Sullivan's trying to cut a promo on Jimmy Garvin, denying Sullivan's invitation to join the varsity club. Even though I'm pretty sure like a week ago, Sullivan was out here implying that Garvin would never have fit into the group to begin with. So the promo, in essence, really didn't make a whole lot of sense to begin with. Now he's trying to recruit Jimmy all of a sudden. But it's so awesome because Sullivan's trying to be super serious here. And meanwhile, in the background, Rick Steiner is just being a Rick Steiner, totally out of his mind. At one point, he tried to lick Sullivan's ear and then rub his head. You could tell Sullivan was getting more and more irritated the longer it went. Steiner's yelling to the top of his lungs, bouncing around like a pinball. Finally, there's a point where Sullivan just stops, turns over his shoulder, and just yells for Steiner to shut up. That was funny. Rotunda mentioned something about trying to recruit Jimmy Garvin to initiate him into the varsity club. And Sullivan basically told Jimmy he'd give him one more chance to accept his invitation. Elsewise, it would spell bad news. God, the fucking chemistry these guys had. It's so wacky. Like, I forgot just how off the wall this varsity club stuff was. Like, all this time, I thought they were mostly just kind of working the amateur wrestling gimmick. I forgot the part where they were all hooked on crazy pills. I mean, you know it's bad when even Kevin Sullivan has to yell for one of his boys to simmer down and stop being so obnoxious. And that took us to Tully and Arn versus Tony Suber and Barry Cawley. Very much the polar opposite of the previous tag match we just encountered. I believe this is the second week in a row where Tully and Arn worked with Tony Suber in a match, and they actually sold for him. They must have liked them. Come to think of it, Beautiful Bobby used to do the same thing with Mike Jackson out of respect. It was a pretty standard Horseman beatdown. They went over with the assisted gourd buster. And they followed up with a last pitch for the Omni tomorrow. Selling that cage match as best they could. Tully made some jokes about Dusty's comments from earlier, saying he was fully capable of buying and selling Ric Flair. To which Tully says tomorrow's not an auction. It is a sparring session. It's about seeing who the superior team is. All these guys trying to make a name for themselves in the sport by testing Tully and Arn in the squared circle. It's as simple as picking a guy up and dropping him on his face. Just like that. That's how quickly the Horsemen can strike. And of course, Arn gets fired up for a minute and mentions that Magnum TA was rumored to make a cameo in the Omni tomorrow as an inspirational appearance. And Arn says Magnum can do whatever he wants, but if he gets in the Horseman's way, they'll lay waste to him and make an example out of him too. Right now, it's not Magnum's time to get physically involved. Maybe that day will come, but now's not the time. He dares anyone to try to step up and challenge the Horseman, because until you have possession of the top gold in the industry, you're just a name without anything to back it up. Have I mentioned how badly I really want to see this cage match? I mean, you can't convince me this won't be part of the syndicated show next week. They gotta show at least a replay of it. If not, it's a crime against humanity. I mean, they've done more to promote this fucking six-man tag at a live event than WWE's done to promote any major title match at WrestleMania in the past 10 years. I think the closest candidate would be maybe what they're doing with Cody and Roman, but even that I'm starting to question right now. Is it that fucking hard? The answer is no. I mean, Tony Khan's been trying to figure it out for 4 goddamn years. Still hasn't managed to generate excitement for anything this huge. For a house show in Atlanta, that's the level of hype they're putting into this 6-man cage match. But it's got that big fight feel. And all it's taking to get there is having dudes that can cut promos on each other, sell the importance of the implication of the match. God. It's not an 8-year convoluted story with twists and turns and all these Law and Order CSI level drama. No, it's just 3 baby faces and 3 heels that can't stand each other and want to tear each other limb from limb. Wrestling used to be so uncomplicated. Now it's both contrived and excessively complicated. But that was pretty much a show right there. They killed about another 5 minutes of airtime with the Larry Zbyszko squash against Max MacGyver. I didn't even bother taking notes down for that one. And then Larry did a promo making fun of the American Dream by saying Dusty exemplifies it to a T. Corruption, pollution, and full of lies. That's the American Dream, huh? Did he just cut a Ludwig Borga promo in 1988? This is like the exact same verbiage I heard them air during those early Borga promos where he was making fun of American filth and visiting all those landfill sites. Did they just copy and paste promo material? Oh, in any case, Baby Doll still has those confidential photos. We are waiting with bated breath to see the big reveal. Whatever it may be. Lingerie, perhaps. Now one can only hope. A horny man. He can only clamor for so much. But yeah, that was pretty much all there was to this one. Show was kind of a hit and miss dodgeball this week, but it wasn't horrible. I think they actually peaked in hour 2 this time, which is usually not the case. Normally they kind of peter out toward the end of the show because they run out of stuff to do. You know, here they actually saved a lot of the good material for later on. So it didn't drag, which is good. But the 2 big things to keep on your radar right now would be the Crockett Cup in April and the inaugural Clash of Champions in March. We're still a ways out from the Bash Tour, so, you know, business is going to kind of be down for a little bit. But, you know, at the same time, you can at least kind of see them attempting to steer the ship around this point. We're slowly getting out of that lull period where things are just kind of prodding along, not really doing a whole lot. The January slump, if you will. But we'll go ahead and flip the page to Midsouth here. Back on commentary with Boyd Pierce was the local network executive, Buddy Nichols. He had done some color with Boyd last week to fill in for when Bill Watts wasn't at the booth. And his performance was less than stellar, shall we say. But Boyd welcomed him back with open arms this week. Nichols was quite humble when he said, "Thanks for putting up with me last week, Boyd." So at least he was self-aware. In any case, this was one of those episodes where they were following a very heavy angle-driven show from the previous week. We had at least one chaotic brawl take place here. But, in comparison to the previous several shows, I would say they leaned back a little bit on the chaos. A couple fun moments peppered in throughout the show, but they didn't get excessive with the pandemonium. And that was fine. They actually had a very interesting encore feature going all the way back to the very first Mid-South episode in January. The grudge match blow-off between Gorgeous Gino Hernandez and Chavo Guerrero. Been a while since we've heard either of those names mentioned on the program. I believe in the case of Gino, that match he had with Chavo was his send-off before he basically left the wrestling business for several years. Yeah, he actually didn't come back to wrestling until his return to Dallas at the Parade of Champions in 1984 at Texas Stadium. And I think Chavo had abruptly left the Mid-South territory for a while following that match. And of course, this blood feud had dated back to the previous year in Houston when Gino had attacked Chavo with the chair in that six-man tag match and tried to end his career. We also had the expert commentary from Mr. Wrestling 2 here. He would occasionally fill in on color throughout this period. And this was a match that was pretty much a sprint all the way from start to finish. They had done the ref bump right in the last minute or two. So Gino tried to grab General Skandar Akbar's folding chair so he could use it as a weapon. To this day, I don't think it was ever fully explained why General Akbar was out there scouting this match. But of course, Chavo thwarted Gino's efforts in using the chair and used it against him to get the pin. It was great too, because we go back to the commentary desk after we literally just saw Chavo light up Gino with a chair shot to the head. Boyd's first comments here. Chavo Guerrero proving he's a great athlete. Sure. I guess we're totally neglecting the concussion that Chavo gave Gino with the chair shot not 2 seconds prior. It was a small little recap package. It was a nice nod to previous history. Didn't really have much story implication for anything ongoing with the show right now because, again, neither of these guys are currently in the territory by this point. But it was a decent way to kill 8 minutes. Then we had the first official match for this week. It is Tiger Conway Jr. versus Sonny Rogers. Nice little babyface showcase for Conway. Last week, he had given Hacksaw Duggan a run for his money before he got beaten in the end. You can kind of see they were giving him a little bit of a push by this point. And that trend continued with him getting this quick win over Rogers. Crowd was, I would say, more or less indifferent when it came to Conway's offense. I thought he looked all right here. I remember this babyface push goes somewhere eventually, but I'm not recalling all the details offhand. Yeah, they actually shot an angle with Conway a bit later on in the show, which I'll get to in a few minutes. Again, though, some of this early 83 stuff I'm a little hairy on. Like, there are certain things that I remember the moment they announce it. the Andre Atlas versus Rat Pack tag title match, for example. And then there's some of this underneath stuff where I see guys getting rubs here and there, and I'm like, I think this goes somewhere down the road, but I don't remember where or when. So then we came back for Hacksaw Duggan versus Tony Torres. The match that put into perspective just how fucking massive Jim Duggan was. Holy cow. It was funny too. You know how I've been making comments about Duggan's Midsouth matches where he actually allows the job guys to occasionally get in some offense on him? Like the fact that he's not selfish and he doesn't just barrel through people and kill them in short order. Well, that did not factor into this match. Duggan barreled through Torres and killed him. In fact, he was violently killed. I don't think Torres got one lick of offense in. Save maybe a drop kick early on, which Duggan no-sold anyway. Nah, Duggan pretty much wiped the floor with him. Did several spots where he pulled Torres off the mat during pin attempts. And, he eventually won with a spear. I mean, this wasn't like that Tiger Conway match the other week where Duggan barely pulled out the win. Now, here he pretty much dominated and brutalized this poor jabroni. Maybe Torres owed him trans. Who knows? Moving right along here, though. Kamala was in action this week against Mike Bond. I will give you 2 guesses as to how you think this went. If you said anything but Kamala ate this man alive, well, you clearly haven't been watching your Ugandan Giant matches in Midsouth. This was more or less the opportunity for Bill Watts to cover the story with Andre from a couple weeks back when Andre was left a bloody mess at the hands of Kamala. The one moment when Watts saw his life flash before his eyes. When Andre grabbed Watts by the collar, shook him like a rag doll, and said, "I want Kamala. Give me Kamala in a match." And Watts promised he would deliver. So they still got that story etched in people's heads. But going back to our conversation about Tiger Conway Jr. for a minute here, I mentioned they were giving him a little bit of a babyface run at this point in early 83. He's got a lot of spunk. A lot of guts. Not a lot of brains, apparently. Because Conway Jr. gets in the ring, and he tells General Akbar that he's ready for the Ugandan Warrior. He defeated Sonny Rogers earlier on, so by golly, that means he's ready for the big guns. Send in the fucking lions, baby. Tiger Conway's ready to get eaten alive. I mean, he's ready for the challenge. So Akbar took Conway up on that offer. He called him a monkey in this little promo battle. Probably could not get away with that dialogue in 2024. But it was the South. And so Conway gave Kamala the fight of a lifetime. Poor bastard never stood a chance, but he fought his little heart out. Now, all kidding aside, what they did right here is that they didn't beat Tiger Conway in the end. Because they had Hacksaw Duggan run interference to have the match thrown out. Obviously working that into their story from the previous week where Duggan nearly got embarrassed, coming relatively close to dropping a fall to Conway Jr. So, I mean, yes, it technically goes down as a victory for Conway Jr. via DQ, but they still didn't need to have anybody do a job to make the angle work. Keeps Conway busy, working with the upper mid-card and main event guys. So I like how they did this. Nothing overly convoluted in terms of the booking, But they had some layered story development, which helped tie things together from the previous episode. Imagine that. It's almost like they knew how to properly follow up on prior angles. And that brought us to Ted DiBiase and Matt Bourne's non-title match with the Junkyard Dog and Mr. Wrestling 2, which they promoted as the featured bout for this week. And they wasted no time kickstarting this, Donnybrook. Titles or no titles, people were hot for this one. It was great fast-paced action, too. DiBiase was bumping his ass off early on for Dog and 2, doing those rock-style headstand flip bumps whenever Dog was throwing punches. Or soup bones, to coin a phrase from the cool kids. One of my favorite spots in this match was the part where 2 had DiBiase in an armbar, and he's wrestling him down to the mat, and then Bourne tries to come in illegally to break up the hold. So Wrestling 2 gives Bourne a monkey flip into the opposite corner while still applying the armbar to DiBiase. They did that spot twice. Looked badass both times. Totally believable too. Did not look choreographed at all. And, yeah, well, the babyfaces are in there pretty much having their way. There was like 3 seconds where the heels tried to isolate Wrestling 2 and work him over, but by and large, Dog and 2 are steadily in control the whole time. And it boiled down to the 4-way breakdown where Ralph nearly loses all sense of control. He eventually gets bumped, which leads to all the running stuff from the outside parties. We had Hacksaw Duggan getting involved, who speared 2 out of the ring. But when he tried to set up the spear on JYD, here comes Tiger Conway Jr. with a chair to cut off Duggan at the pass. This is where I noted, Tiger Conway was all over this fucking show. Good Lord, that guy went from run-of-the-mill enhancement talent to beefing with all the main eventers in like, what was it, 2 or 3 weeks? That's quite the hot shot. And of course, you had Kamala get involved at the end and try to take out Conway, but Dog stepped in and basically sent the heels packing. By that point, the match had been thrown out. But we did get the visual here with Dog 2 and Conway Jr. standing in the ring. All the heels powdered. People were going ballistic for it. It was great. What more can you say? The classic Mid-South angle we all know and love. Some would say it's a staple of Mid-South wrestling. I'd have to agree with that assertion. And as we come back from commercial, Bill Watts provides us with a status update on the mystery assassin that showed up in Mid-South last week on his patented motorcycle. Teasing that face-off with JYD. Even Boyd couldn't help but crack a smile whenever Watts mentioned the motorcycle gimmick. Now, of course, I'm referring to the TV debut of the Black Ninja, who is now going by the name Kendo Nagasaki. And it did click. I remember the Black Ninja nickname. I forgot about Kendo Nagasaki, however. But, this is their opportunity to explain a little bit of his backstory. Actually, it was J.J. Dillon's opportunity to explain the backstory. We were told that he had been sent from Florida to manage this mysterious black ninja who had recently been banished from the Orient, supposedly for kicking too much ass, as J.J. explained in this pre-tape. But this is really cool how they did all this. We see Nagasaki doing his kendo stick ritual with all the glitter and glamour that went into the presentation of the gimmick. You see JJ in the screen cap doing the promo, talking about his background, talking about his training in the dojos, talking about how he's a master of more than just the kendo martial art. He's actually a hybrid of multiple MMA styles. saying that he's a dangerous man that entered the sport of wrestling in the States because he had been forced out of every international market he appeared in for, again, being too lethal. Actually taking the time to explain the backstory of a character, regardless of how preposterous it may seem. It's more than I can say for the majority of people that show up in today's business, where people are just thrown out on national television and the audience is just kind of expected to know who the fuck they are. Obviously JJ's a fluid speaker, so he was perfect for this role. And I had thought they had given this role to Skandar Akbar. I had completely forgotten that JJ was associated with this gimmick for a period of time. It was really cool stuff, man. Really cool. I used to be so captivated by the backgrounds and the stories of gimmicks and wrestlers, especially back when they used to do stuff like this and it was presented to be a big deal. And so we pitched back for the official in-ring debut of the Black Ninja. Just like last week when he confronted JYD, he took a couple minutes to do his ceremonial kendo stick ritual. And we actually got our first look at him once he removed the mask and, all the steel plates that were built into his ring jacket. He sort of bared a resemblance to Kabuki. He had the green mist gimmick, similar looking black trunks. He did have a receding hairline, which was a little odd. I mean, the whole thing only went like 20 seconds, but he did several karate chops to Joe Stark, went over with a thrust kick to the chest. He also had this wacky spin dance he kept doing where he stuck his hands out in front of him and kind of did the hokey pokey. In 2024, I kind of just rolled my eyes at it. And then there were several people in the crowd that did the same. Kind of like, really? The fuck is this shit? I mean, it surely wasn't how people reacted to Kamala when he came in. You could literally see people cowering in fear whenever he would get within close proximity of them. I don't know, this was like, yeah, okay. This is a little hokey even for our taste. I don't recall the Black Ninja being a gimmick that they stuck with long term, at least in the Mid-South area. I think they tried running with it for a while, kind of realized it wasn't getting over, and then quietly moved away from it. After seeing what went down here, I think I understand why. I mean, they had all the pomp and circumstance behind the presentation, but once you peeled back the curtain and it came bell time, there really just wasn't much there visually. We'll see if I remember JYD being able to get something out of him. But now that left just enough time for the main event this week. The standby match, if you will. It's Kelly Kiniski and Marty Lundy versus Tim Horner and Art Cruz. They only had maybe a few minutes of time left when they rang the bell to start the match. Didn't get a ton of time. But the heels worked over Horner briefly. And with about 90 seconds left in the match, kind of broke down into a random four-way where Ralph Neely was just kind of standing there watching everybody do shit. I don't know if maybe the timing got off or they just didn't realize where they were in the remaining time limit, but it was really strange because they're in there doing four-way spots, and then eventually everybody just kind of went back to their corner and, well, then they kept wrestling. Not entirely sure what the four-way spot was all about. Didn't lead to anything. Didn't set up the finish. Just happened. Then they ended the show with no finish as Cruz gets the hot tag and starts to make his babyface comeback. Yeah. It's kind of all she wrote for that one. The big takeaways here kind of centered around the Tiger Conway Jr. push and the multiple segments he was involved with. Obviously, with everything going down here with the Rat Pack, JYD, and Wrestling 2, the debut of the Black Ninja was sort of a hot and cold deal where, well, the setup for it was great. The match itself was kind of flat. Didn't really do much to leave an impression or showcase anything he could really do athletically. But, there was still some fun stuff that happened this week. As for next week, we will be seeing the return of Mr. Olympia. Now remember, he was suspended for 90 days after a loser leaves Midsouth match where he ended up dropping the fall. And we'll go into more explanation of how everything surfaced when we review his return. But keep that in your back pocket because it'll be crucial for later story development. I'll say I'm a little scatterbrained with some of this early 83 stuff in Mid-South. I did not forget about the Mr. Olympia story. That I can assure you. So, closing out with World Class. First of all, good news. No buffering issues this week. Heck yeah. And the show was also less blasé than the previous one. I at least wrote down more than 2 sentences about all the matches this time. It's hard to believe we're already in March, but, yeah, man. Just barreling through this timeline. And we've already seen a lot of interesting things surface in just the past couple of months. Something actually came to my attention this week during their Encore feature. This time they actually delved into the time machine a little bit. They replayed a Fantastics versus Pretty Young Things tag match, which dated back a while ago. And the only reason I knew that is because I sat there going, oh yeah, Norvell Austin and Coco Ware haven't been on this show in weeks. Where the fuck did those guys disappear to? I forgot all about them. I actually have no idea where they went. The Coco Ware, to my knowledge, maybe I'm misremembering the timeline. Like, he didn't debut for the WWF until like 87, right? So there's no way he would have even been under contract by this point. These guys just completely vanished in the last month or two. And this may have been the last thing we saw them do on TV before vanishing into the night. I even remembered bits and pieces about this match once it got going. I forgot how fucking white hot the crowd was. That Bobby Fulton hot tag sent these people into a frenzy. It was good though. The PYTs are really good at milking the heat spots. In a way, the Midnights kind of stole their thunder when they came in as the next big hot heel team. They were always on top of the heat segments, working the illegal underhanded double team spots when the ref wasn't looking, taking advantage of the 5 count where they could. It was great here at the finish, too. Bobby catches Coco in the small package, and when Norvell tries to crawl over and break it up, there's Tommy Rogers to dive on top of Austin and thwart that. Crowd popped the nut for the Fantastics going over, obviously. Yeah, it's just a damn shame the PYTs have sort of vanished off the face of the earth. I was kind of digging their heel run in the area. But like I said, with the Midnights coming in recently, I guess you could argue they kind of filled that missing void. Not that having more than one heel team's a bad thing. I think when it comes to that discussion, the PYTs and the Midnights were sort of viewed as middle card teams under the World Class umbrella. So I guess there really wasn't much of a purpose to have them both around at the same time. Whereas like with the Von Erichs and the Fantastics, yes, they're both babyface teams, but the Fantastics were never booked on the level of the Von Erichs in Dallas. Not even close. So you could get away with having both those teams on the roster at the same time. course, by this point, the Fantastics were still the American Tag Team Champions. Yeah, so this definitely goes a ways back. Then we came to a very unique little matchup here. Not what I was expecting, but I'll take it. It's Bill Mercer versus Jim Cornette in a tennis match. Nah, I'm just joshing. Although Mercer did say he was interested in seeing whether or not Corny could actually play tennis. Someone will have to ask him on his podcast. No, this was Bobby Eaton versus Mark Reagan. Singles action for the Midnights this week. Dennis was, well, not there, obviously. I have no idea where he was. Caught in traffic. No-showed. Bad gas. Who knows? But according to Mr. Cornette, Reagan was a pushover, so Eaton shouldn't have had any problem taking care of him. And by and large, he didn't. There was a moment later in the match where Reagan gave Eaton a clean stiff shot to the bridge in the nose. Then Eaton tried to beg off by extending his hand to call a truce. That was funny. But Eaton stayed in control for the most part. Caught Reagan with a Saito suplex toward the end. And he eventually set up the diving knee drop from the middle rope for the pin. Action was good. People were giving Corny a hard time on the floor, which kind of helped out during the earlier spots where both guys were mostly in stationary holds. I didn't really jot down much about the match, aside from Dennis being MIA. They didn't even draw attention to it. Mercer didn't acknowledge it. Cornette didn't bring it up. It was a bit strange. But I'm certainly never going to complain about a beautiful Bobby singles match. I mean, in 1985, that probably didn't seem like a big deal for most people watching. In hindsight, when you look back at a lot of Bobby's work as a singles guy, especially later in Crockett Promotions and WCW, you come to appreciate moments like this that much more. And the weirdness continued with missing tag partners as we go into the next match. This time they broke up the Fantastics and had Bobby Fulton work singles action against Jack Victory. Apparently all the tag teams were on rotation this week. One half was working the show, the other half was at the bar. Now, this one wasn't as fluid as the previous match, but it was still solid. A couple awkward miscue spots during the flurry moments from Fulton. But of course, the fans are hanging on to every last thing he did. Some fun chain wrestling spots where Fulton was just kind of having his way with Victory on the mat. He was channeling his inner Ron Garvin with all the body manipulation. But they ended up building into a fun sequence at the end where Fulton fired up one last time. They did some crisscross stuff off the ropes. Then eventually Fulton came back with a diving crossbody for the 3 count. Of course, within a matter of 30 seconds after the bell, Bobby Fulton's already outside the ring getting molested by the girls as he's going over to sign autographs. That guy was something else. But in terms of action, it was very simple. Again, not really sure why they opted to have the Midnights and the Fantastics work singles matches on this set of tapings. But it was a nice little breakup from what we were used to seeing. And the other thing, too, is it keeps them occupied with other stuff while they're not directly going after each other. Because they are technically still feuding around this point. And we've already seen like 7 matches in world class between the two. So this is fine. No complaints. And that took us to this little pre-tape with Brian DeDias and Kerry Von Erich at the gym. Well, you know, back when pro wrestlers used to actually go to the gym and try to look like reasonable athletes. This was, again, nothing really elaborate. You know, we talked about DeDias coming back to the Dallas territory after having been away for a while. He was touring around the world for a few years. So Kerry had mentioned that briefly here. They talked about growing up together as childhood friends and doing a lot of sports together from a young age. Mainly what they were here to do was set up the TV main event, talking about how Adias was going to be one of the lumberjacks during the Kerry and Kevin versus Gino and Chris Adams tag match. You know, Adias did one of those, I need to come up with some material to talk about, so I'm going to spend 5 minutes explaining how machinery works. He talked about the weight machines he likes to use, work on the various muscle groups, and try to accentuate multiple areas of muscle growth where he could. He also made sure to let everybody know that these machines are perfectly equipped for males and females. Just so we know that the gym is not misogynist. But that was mainly it. My first thought when I saw this was, has to be a home gym, because there's no way on God's green earth faculty would ever allow this kind of recording equipment to be in a public gym space. Especially not fucking studio cameras. That would have been great, though, if we just saw the general manager come storming in and go, hey, get that camera equipment out of my gym. Abrupt cut, abrupt cut. So, our main event, a lumberjack tag match with Kevin and Kerry versus Gorgeous Gino and Gentleman Chris. And God, you want to talk about the ultimate sprint match. This is all action from bell to bell. There was no downtime for this one. Boom, 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 from start to finish. And this match was fucking awesome. Probably the closest thing we've come to a Mid-South level match on a Dallas show in a very long time. There was nothing patterned about this one. From start to finish, back and forth, back and forth. Both teams just firing on all cylinders here. Hard-hitting action. And of course, the thing that's great with the Lumberjacks is that, you know, once a guy gets dumped out to the floor, he's immediately tossed back in. So it kept the pace moving the whole time. I probably should have figured it was going to be electric when Chris Adams hit a super kick on Kerry in the first 30 seconds. I was like, oh, we're just going straight to the finishers, aren't we? But the crowd was super hot for it. All four guys looked fantastic. You know, I love that the Lumberjacks didn't pick and choose sides with the faces and heels. They were totally unbiased here. If a guy got thrown out, they were right there to slide him back in. Or in the case of Gino, at the point he tried to bail later on and run for greener pastures, every single one of them hunted him down and then tossed him back in the ring. You know, again, though, it was very 50-50 for a lot of it. Didn't spend a whole lot of time working an extended heat angle or anything. You know, Von Erichs would have control for a little bit. They'd switch it up and have one of the heels get control for a few minutes, and then they'd quickly turn it back around again and give the Von Erichs the advantage. It was very cyclical like that. Very out of the ordinary. And of course, things totally broke down with everybody at the end. Gary Hart got involved, which was basically the cue for everybody to run interference and have the match thrown out. And we had this fantastic moment at the very end where all the babyfaces are standing in the ring. Of course, Gino looks right into the camera and goes, "Look at these wimps. 6-on-2. Unbelievable." Because obviously, you know, Gina's going to take the time to poke fun that the babyfaces outnumbered the heels before everybody got run off. Wonderful stuff. You know, I could spend an hour breaking down everything move for move if I wanted to, but, you know, this is one of those matches that I would encourage people to go check out for yourself if you can find the footage somewhere. I haven't been able to say that about a lot of Dallas matches in a while, but this one most definitely. 4 great athletes just putting on a wrestling clinic. You know, and of course, it's one of those controlled chaos situations where, yeah, there's a lot going on, especially toward the finish when all hell breaks loose. But it's not just everybody going into business for themselves and doing whatever the fuck they want. They got the story across. And it's one of those send-offs where the babyfaces stood strong, but again, nobody had to do a job. So it counts as a no finish, technically, but the crowd still goes ballistic. Can't complain about that. Phenomenal. And a much bigger improvement over the previous episode, no doubt. Awesome main event with a hot crowd. 2 fun middle card tag matches with 2 great workers. Can't complain about the wrestling side of things this week. Story advancement, that was minimal. I think this was more of a showcase for the talent pool more than anything. But, sometimes you need those shows to counterbalance the promo material or even the angle material. Drawing more comparisons to Midsouth, but they do this kind of stuff extremely well when they piece together their taping schedule. I think with Dallas, it's a little less strict. But, I was a fan of this one. Very good show. So, as we conclude things for this one, again, I encourage everybody to stop by every Monday and Friday to check out the new shows. You can find us on Rumble, too, if you prefer alternatives to YouTube. And we'll be back on Monday for regularly scheduled podcast programming. Thanks to everybody that kind of stuck around and check out the Monday show here. And, good stuff. We'll be back. In the meantime, everybody take care. Peace out.